Hey guys, it's Senti Reads, and as you can see by the video title, today I'll be tearing apart some terrible writing. I won't be sharing the name of the book these examples came from, as it is a debut novel from a self-published author, and I'm really not trying to shit on anyone's dreams. I am, however, trying to make a point that a book is a product for sale, especially in this case, it was published on Amazon, so you have to pay to read it. This is not a free website. So you need to put out a polished product if you're asking money for it. That's all I'm saying here. I want to be clear that I think self-publishing is just as valid as traditional publishing, but there are extra steps you need to take. You'll need to hire your own editor, and this author did have an editor credited, but they didn't do a very good job, as I'm about to show you. If you're posting your work for free on a site like Wattpad, then obviously the same rules don't apply to you. You're not asking money for this product, but if you are charging money for your book, it really needs to be polished, and it needs to have a professional edit. And I know that professional editing can be very expensive, and many people don't have the funds to do that when they're self-publishing. I totally understand that. I don't think that means you shouldn't self-publish, but please make sure that you are editing your own work to the best of your ability. Put as much effort into it as you can, because you are charging money for it. It is a product, and you need to give people what they're paying for. Another disclaimer, I am not a professional editor, and I have never taken any writing classes formally, so I'm completely self-taught. If I get anything wrong, please let me know in the comments below. With that being said, let's jump right in. Surely there must be something wrong when a woman as stoic as yourself is caught crying. I think he meant the words to sound kind, but men in Cambertis almost always a hidden agenda beneath every word. Let's first address the elephant in the room with the glaring typo. There's a word completely missing from the second sentence, so I think it should be, but men in Cambertis almost always had a hidden agenda beneath every word, and they just missed the word had. One or two typos isn't a death sentence for your book. Even traditionally published books have typos, but this one has several pretty major typos, especially in the first, this typo here wasn't in the first 10 or 20 pages. That's really not a good sign for your reader. Typos aside, the dialogue is stilted and awkward. Surely there must be something wrong when a woman as stoic as yourself is caught crying. What, people don't talk like this? It would have been better if he said something like, "What's wrong? I've never seen you cry," or something more casual. It's just too formal. This is also a pretty big example of show don't tell. This speaker, whoever this speaker is directly telling the reader that this other character is stoic, and we don't really need to have a character verbally explain that to us. You can just depict the other character as being stoic instead of having it outright explained. My hands unclenched and I looked down at them. I could see the indents the thorns made in my skin and watched as they rebounded. Alright, so there are a few things wrong with this one. First of all, there should be a comma in the first sentence. My hands unclenched and I looked down at them are two independent clauses, so there needs to be a comma before the "and" to separate them. An independent clause is simply a group of words that can stand alone as its own sentence, which these two things can, so there needs to be a comma. My next big issue is the use of filter words like looked, see, and watched. These words act as a filter between the character's experience and the reader, which is immersion breaking and entirely unnecessary. This is a first-person narration, so if they're looking at something, then obviously they are seeing it. You don't need to say, "I saw it," because they're looking at it. Obviously they see it. I'd rewrite this as, I unclenched my hands, and the indents the thorns pressed into my skin rebounded. It's still not great writing, but you're getting rid of those filter words. Sweat pooled on the back of my neck beneath my braid, and I cursed myself for wearing a long-sleeved blouse. While made of airy linen, the extra fabric covering my arms was unwanted in the direct sunlight. Here's another example of a missing comma between two independent clauses, but I chose this passage for another reason. Call this nitpicking, it absolutely is, but I thought it was hilarious that the author explained why long sleeves make you hot. I don't need to be told that extra fabric on your arms makes you hot, because that's what a sleeve is. That's pretty well understood. I pulled the dagger from my calf and jumped on the him once more, this time wrapped around his front. My body didn't hesitate and didn't shy away. Wow, okay, there's another pretty big typo. I pulled the dagger from my calf and jumped on the him. What does that mean? I think they either need to drop the word the, so jumped on him, or change him to man, so jumped on the man. Either way, this needs to be fixed. This is a pretty bad typo. The second sentence here is also bad. My body didn't hesitate and didn't shy away. Didn't hesitate and didn't shy away are the same exact thing, so you don't need both of those descriptions, you just need one. In a movement too fast for my vision, he turned, one hand releasing my feet from his waist and the other throwing me away. Girl, if the movement was too fast for your vision, then how did you see exactly what he just did? If it was too fast, you shouldn't be able to describe what he just did, because you didn't see it. There are limitations in first-person narratives, and if the POV character didn't directly see it with their own eyes, then they can't describe it, so if it was too fast, they didn't see it. If this is an issue that you run into frequently, then you might want to consider switching to a third-person POV instead of first-person. Seeing my old friend's name on a gravestone made the reality of his death all the more real. This is supposed to be a serious moment, but I fully laughed out loud when I read this for the first time. Made the reality of his death all the more real is such an odd and funny phrase, because if it's reality, then it is real. Again, this is just extra words for no reason. I'd rewrite this as, seeing my old friend's name etched into his gravestone made his death all the more real. I shook my head. I'm not even going to argue. You just do what makes you happy. There's another comma misuse here, but for a different reason from what I've pointed out before. This is a comma splice. There's no and or but or any kind of word like that separating these two independent clauses. So you can't just put a comma between them. This needs to be a period. There are some people who say you can use a comma splice in dialogue, which is what is happening in this instance, but I would avoid that. A comma splice is grammatically incorrect and it is very amateur, so you cannot combine two independent clauses with one comma. If they are two independent sentences and they stand on their own, put a period or put a semicolon, not a comma. The man who held me was surprised, a sound of shock escaping him as I slipped from his grip and began to run down the path. Yet again, there's a whole lot of words here that don't need to be here. I don't need to be directly told that the man is surprised, because I could figure that out by his sound of shock, whatever that means. You could say he gasped, that's a sound of shock. He yelped, that's a sound of shock, but this is very not descriptive here, and you don't need to say he's surprised if he's shocked. Also, the phrase began to run is super unnecessary. That's something you'll see often in amateur writing is began to, whatever do the action. They don't need to begin to run, they can just run. I'd rewrite this as, the man gasped as I slipped from his grip and ran down the path. My braided hair thumped against my back as I ran, the cloak hood no longer in place to secure it. The forest debris threatened to trip me with every step, branches tore at my face and arms, but I refused to slow. My heart started in my chest, working to keep me moving, keeping my legs pumping, keeping me running so that I could escape the path and make it to a safe place in the woods. I pulled this passage because of the random format change in the middle of the paragraph. Oftentimes, authors use italics to indicate a character's thoughts, but that's not what's happening here. The action is continued to be described, not her thoughts. And this is from first-person POV, so generally you don't need to put their thoughts in italics either. It's kind of just part of the narrative. My only explanation here is that the switch to italics was a mistake and was just missed in editing. That isn't a great negotiation tactic. One slurred over me until my back was pressed against the rough bark of a tree behind me. This is admittedly another nitpick, but little things like this add up and drag the quality of your writing down significantly. My back was pressed against the rough bark of a tree behind me. Well, if the tree is against your back, then by definition it is behind you. We don't need those extra words to explain that to us. Your back isn't on your front, so the tree can't be in front of you, meaning it has to be behind you. I know that's so stupid and probably nobody else cares about that, but I care. Also, I'm confused as to what's happening here in this scene. How does someone slurring their words result in someone else being pressed against a tree? There's another verb or something missing in this sentence. I'd rewrite this as, that isn't a great negotiation tactic, one slurred, pushing me until I was pressed against a tree, the rough bark digging into my back. The dull light from the embers wasn't enough to see their faces. He didn't speak back to the man, only made a gasping sound. This is the same mistake as before with sound of shock. Don't say gasping sound, just say gasp or gasped. That's already a sound. I brought my hands up, smoothing the hair out of my own face as the man's flashed through my mind once more. His green eyes were deep set and rested below his large forehead. A scar fell over the bridge of his nose. I remembered the sharp edge of his jaw and thin, wide lips, and the sound of his voice as he spat at me. For added context, the POV character is sitting completely alone in a room. There is nobody else. So when she says she smooths her hair out of her own face, that's completely unnecessary because there's nobody else in the room. You're not smoothing someone else's hair out of their face, so of course it's your own face. If you just cut out the word own, this is much better. The second sentence, though, had me absolutely rolling. His green eyes were deep set and rested below his large forehead. Well, duh, that's where eyes go. Did his eyes rest on his ass? Of course they rested below his forehead. The rest of the passage is whatever. In general, you don't need to describe a character's facial features in this much detail unless there is a plot reason to do so. Especially a side character, we really don't need to know this much how they look. I set the brush down and ran my fingers through it. My hair color was unique. So she's trying to say she ran her fingers through her hair, but the subject of this sentence is brush, so it sounds like she ran her fingers through the brush. I'd rewrite this as, I set the brush down and ran my fingers through my hair. Also, the second sentence is the definition of show don't tell. Don't tell me directly that her hair color is unique. Show other characters reacting to her hair color in a way that indicates that it would be uncommon, or don't describe any other characters as having that hair color. Her hair is white, by the way, in case you were wondering, because she's an edgy girl. Finally, I found a thigh holster. It was a simple black leather, but that's all I needed. My hand stretched out and reached for it, and my fingers closed around the deceivingly soft texture. Girl, I know how hands work. I don't need every single motion described to me in excruciating detail. This is something this author repeatedly does, is describing every basic step of an action that is so simple. I'd rewrite this as, finally, I found a suitable thigh holster. I stroked the black leather straps, surprised by the deceivingly soft texture. I threw her a wink. I've been told my eyes give it away. She rolled her own, but I saw the blush that crept along her cheeks at my flirting. She rolled her own. Her own what? What's the subject of the sentence? I know by context that the author means eyes, but what is she supposed to do? Roll someone else's eyes? Again, you don't need the word own here because you can't roll someone else's eyes. Of course, she's rolling her own eyes. Also, I don't need the explanation that she's blushing because she's being flirted with. Like, that's pretty obvious. If she's blushing, it's because of the flirting. You don't need to explain that's why she's blushing. I'd rewrite this as, she rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the blush that rose to her cheeks. Tears began streaming down my face, and I knew that this was the first time I'd cried in front of her. You can't make me, I whispered as I felt my face contorting into that of anger. Oh my god, what is up with all these damn words? I swear the author could have cut this 500-page beast down to like 450 pages at least if they simplified their phrasing. Also, the dialogue tag is incorrect here. There should be a comma instead of a period. Don't ask me why. Just look up how to format dialogue tags. This is not how you do it. You need to have a comma here, not a period. I'd rewrite this as, tears streamed down my face. You can't make me, I grimaced. I could feel her skin pale. I'll have to buy them in disguise again. My aunt will know something is going on if I buy a pair in public. What? How do you feel someone's skin pale? That makes no sense. When you see their skin pale, how would you feel it? Also, this is another example of a comma splice. Don't do that. When our time with the horses ended, Eveline helped both girls out of the saddle while I put everything, including the horses, back as we'd found them. What an odd sentence. What was he gonna do with the horses? Actually, I don't want to know what he was gonna do with the horses. I'd rewrite this as, when our riding lesson was over, Eveline helped the girls out of their saddles, and I returned our equipment. Maddox rolled his eyes, but I smiled at the interaction. Take a seat to put on your boots. He turned and handed me the new shoes, and I smiled. They were plain and black, but they were my size. Did anybody else catch that she smiled twice? Call me a cynical asshole, but the characters in this book are constantly smiling, and it's a little creepy. She doesn't need to smile at the first thing he said and then smile again. Like, it's just too repetitive and it's weird. Also, I love that the only description we're getting of the boots is they are plain and black and they are her size. Like, either describe it in detail or just don't describe it. I looked in the mirror as she worked. The skirt was long to the floor, but wasn't full of tulle beneath it to give structure, like my ball gown had been. No, the silk this dress was made of simply hung down my hips, a long slit starting halfway up my right thigh and exposing my leg, wide with remnants of old muscle, the further it fell to the floor. The bottom of the corset tucked into my waist, accentuating the outline of an hourglass. The corset was made of the same silk, but had strong panels that maintained its structure. A hard tug from Natalia had a gust of air coughing through my lips. Huh? This was the absolute most confusing way to describe a dress. I really can't picture what this dress looks like at all. No, the silk this dress was made of simply hung down my hips, a long slit starting halfway up my right thigh and exposing my leg, wide with remnants of old muscle, blah blah blah. What? I think she means the slit in the dress gets wider towards the bottom, but it sounds like her leg is getting wider. And also, what the hell does old muscle mean? Like remnants of old muscle? What does that mean? This character is 24 years old, so how is her muscle old? I don't understand what this means. Is the author trying to specify the character didn't recently become muscular? Like, just say she has a well-toned leg. This is so unnecessary. I'm not even going to try to rewrite this mess. Sorry, not sorry. She took it and replaced it, exposing so much sweet, thick thigh to do so, and nodded. I know it's not, she said in a knowing tone. I'm not even going to touch whatever the fuck the first sentence is, so sorry about that. Yet again, the dialogue tag is improperly formatted, but that's not the worst part. I know it's not, she said in a knowing tone. Bitch, she just said she knew something, so of course her tone is knowing. There doesn't need to be a dialogue tag here. Just cut the whole she said in a knowing tone out completely and nothing changes. You don't need to have she said, he said after every dialogue tag. You can have an action that implies that. She reached up and swept her braid away from her neck, and then I was looking at her exposed upper back, neck, and shoulders. Eveline was strong, but her muscles weren't obvious. They didn't protrude like someone who worked to keep themselves toned. She was thick with the curves that came with genetics and a healthy diet.
Excuse me, what?
I can't even begin to put into words how much I hate this, so I won't. Just don't write your book like this. I'm not going to read the next full passage, but the main character explicitly mentions obsidian, which is formed by lava, and then almost immediately after that description, we get this little gem. I cocked an eyebrow. What's a volcano? Bitch, if you don't know what a volcano is, then how do you know what obsidian is? Obsidian is made by a volcano, right? By lava? So maybe you could argue that the characters know what obsidian is, but don't know how it's formed. But I kind of think that's a cop-out and it's lazy world building, because this is a fantasy world, this is not a contemporary world. So realistically, volcanoes could not exist in this world. But we're getting this clumsy writing of, okay, volcanoes exist, but obsidian is not made by volcanoes, or these characters don't know that. Like, it's just weird, and it's extra details that make me, clearly I'm sitting here complaining about it, so it ruined my immersion of this book. If the character doesn't know what volcanoes are and they don't know what obsidian is, then you can just describe the knife in some other way. Just say it's a black hard material. You don't need to use the word obsidian, especially because the same thing happens later on when a dagger is described as looking like chrome. But as I said, this is a fantasy setting, so they shouldn't know what chrome is. They shouldn't have chrome in this world. Vesteria, a land full of entitled pricks, rich beyond compare, with a kingdom nestled on diamond mines, so fertile with the glistening stones that each day the miners went in with empty wheelbarrows and left with full ones. I can't. I just can't. Is there really no better way to describe how full of diamonds this mine is than to say each day the miners went in with empty wheelbarrows and left with full ones? Really? That's how mining works. If they left with empty ones, then this would be a shitty mine. I don't even know what to say here, guys. I gripped the dagger hard this time, brandishing it between the men as all three of their eyes widened, but based on the sneers that twisted their faces, the sight of the weapon only infuriated them. So the first sentence makes it sound like the men have three eyes collectively that they share between them, and then the second sentence is such a mess that I don't even know where to start. The apostrophe in sneers is a typo, and the second half of the sentence serves no purpose. I'm gonna do my best to rewrite this. I brandished the dagger at the men, and their faces twisted into enraged sneers. I smirked at him and raised my left hand to brush some hair away from his forehead. His eyes drifted to my lips. This isn't Twister or the Hokey Pokey. As I said before, you don't have to describe every minute action that a character takes. We don't need to specifically know if it's the left or right hand that's doing the action. It's not important. I'd rewrite this as, I smirked and brushed his hair away from his forehead. I bent to pull my other dagger from my calf and scoffed as I reached behind with both hands and cut the tie of the corset that held me in place. The ribbon unfurled immediately, and I pulled the bodice until it was so loose that the dress fell to the floor and puddled around my feet. Good lord, that's a whole lot of words. You don't need that much specific detail when describing a character's actions. I would rewrite this as, I pulled my other dagger from its holster and reached behind me to slice the laces of my corset. I tugged on the now loosened bodice until the dress fell to the floor, puddling around my feet. And I'm not afraid to kill you before you can kill me. Then he reached up and grasped the black dagger, ripping it out of his hand as he screamed. This dialogue tag is so weird and poorly structured. The word then is completely unnecessary, and it's another kind of filler word. Actions are happening in a sequence. You don't need to say, then this happened, then that happened, then this. Well, of course, the next thing is happening. It's happening in a sequence. I know that explanation probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but don't put the word then in your writing. Don't do it. I'd rewrite this as, I'm not afraid to kill you, he snarled, grasping the handle of the black dagger. He screamed as he ripped it from his flesh. There's a whole lot more I have to say about this book, especially in relation to the plot, but I really don't want to get into all of that here. And I think my points are getting repetitive in terms of the grammar usage here. Again, no hate to this author specifically, but they could have put a lot more effort into this book. Even if they couldn't afford to hire an editor, which, as I said, in this case an editor is credited, there's a lot more they could have done themselves. Simply running the manuscript through ProWriting Aid or Grammarly or some other software would have eliminated those obvious typos and comma issues. And those are much cheaper services than hiring a professional editor. The line editing I did throughout this video takes a while, but cutting out unnecessary filter words and simplifying how actions are described would go a long way in making this author's writing look more polished. For everyone who made it to the end of this long and rambly video, I hope you were able to take away some useful advice. I know a lot of my critiques were nitpicky, but little things can really affect how your writing flows and how it's received by the reader. Writing a book is hard and time-consuming, and editing is absolutely not something you should cut corners on. Again, if you can't afford to hire an editor, please sit down and put the effort into reading your book line by line and cutting out filler words and looking for typos and doing all of those things. You really need to do that to offer a polished product to your readers. That's enough of my ranting for one video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye guys!